Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We are just over 2 days away from college football in Orlando with Miami taking on Florida. That's the big matchup on Saturday, week 0. And, of course, Arizona taking on Hawaii as well. In week 1, everybody dives into play from Thursday through Sunday. But because of that little matchup in Orlando and, to a lesser extent, Hawaii and Arizona, that pushes up my season predictions 1 week, which really pains me because I like to think this over. Actually, I haven't thought it over at all, to the point where I did a live stream last night promoting my predictions, and I had given it no thought, and I still haven't. But we will, for posterity's sake, to keep a tradition going that's been going since 1982, where I've made my season predictions, and then I have also made my weekly predictions. I've predicted each top 25 game since 1982, and every NFL game since 1979. I was just fascinated as a kid with Jimmy the Greek, in particular, predicting the games. I didn't even care about the spread at the time. It was years and years and years later. I don't even care about the spread now, really. It doesn't matter. It really shouldn't matter at all. The spread is stupid, but of course, it's in play for this purpose, to predict and to bet. To lay wagers on the games and to make the teams equal. That's the reason it exists. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. The team should just go out on the field, and the team that's better by at least 1 point wins the game. That's what matters. That's what matters. But we've made up this point spread deal and odds and so forth, so it's fun. So I do predict straight up, as I have against the money line for years, going back to 1979. But I also predict against the spread, and I probably started doing that about 10 years ago. And check out the video in which I reviewed my prediction record for the last 10 seasons in college and the NFL. Now, keep in mind, starting next week with week 1, my predictions will be available at the Voice of College Football community. So if you go down to the description section below, grab that link next to Voice of College Football community, grab that link, sign up, and you can get my predictions every week. Plus, an exclusive live stream with me each and every week. This is something that was suggested and recommended by you, the viewers. Many of you, about 20 to 25, said, hey, Mark, we would love to do live streams with you on a regular basis where we come on, like guests, talk college football. So I've done it 7 or 8 times. Would love to have more of you on. Would love to do it each and every week. I have promised a weekly live stream exclusive with me to talk college football on the Voice of College Football community. But you need to make it happen as well, because if I've got nobody to talk to, then we're not going to strike up a live stream for that purpose. And also, again, my predictions on a weekly basis of the top 25 games and any other games that are relevant each and every week at the Voice of College Football community. All right, coming up now with not a whole lot of thoughts. So for those people out there, and I appreciate the compliments, who say that I can make great predictions, I have many times, and I've made some really bad ones. So I've had egg on my face, and I've come through with the likes of 2016, predicting all 4 college football playoff teams before the season started. So it happens in both directions. Last year, my selections were Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, and Ohio State. I would defend that as a near 4 for 4, but of course it was 2 for 4. But I cannot predict what somebody else is going to select. So understand that as well when we predict the college football playoff teams. It's not like predicting NFL playoff teams, because that's an objective system. We're predicting what somebody else is going to select. Kind of makes no sense. Just like the college football playoffs make no sense. All right, that's another topic that we've covered many times. On to my predictions right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We will see you soon. Hopefully I get it right. It's going to be right here on YouTube through the championship game in January for you to make fun of and for me to defend. All right, let's get started in the Pac-12, where Utah won the South Division in 2018, and they repeat as champion right here, going 9-3 overall, 6-3 in the conference. 1 game better than USC at 7-5, 5-4. 2 other bowl-eligible teams from the South Division in rivals Arizona and Arizona State, both at 6-6, although the Sun Devils 1 game better in conference play. UCLA 1 game better than Chip Kelly's inaugural season at UCLA at 4-8, 3-6 in conference play. In Colorado, the worst team in the division at 3-9, 1-8. All right, let's go to the North Division. And along with the Big Ten Western Division, this is the most competitive and balanced division in college football. and really a tremendous race for the division championship. Oregon, despite not having and finishing with as good a record as Washington, will win the division based on tiebreaker. So the Ducks win it at 7-2, outdistancing Washington at 7-2, despite the Huskies finishing with the best record in conference overall at 10-2. Stanford plays that murderer's row of a non-conference schedule with Northwestern, UCF, and Notre Dame, and no gimmies, only 3 out-of-conference games, of course, for Pac-12 teams. Stanford goes 7-2, so a 3-way tie for the North Division Championship. I like the Ducks emerging. Washington State finished 2018 with the best record in the Pac-12. Did not win the championship, but finished with the best record at 11-2. They dipped to 8-4. Cal gets back to postseason play at 6-6. Oregon State remarkably wins another game in the Pac-12 as they did in a comeback win at Colorado last year. The Beavers finish at 2-10, 1-8 in conference play. So it sets up a conference championship game of Oregon. The Ducks, who I believe along with Stanford have played in the most conference championship games since the Pac-12 forged the conference championship game about 8 years ago. Ducks win over the Utah Utes at 27-23. Oregon finishes at 10-3. Of course, the games we need to look out for during the regular season that is really going to form the narrative and show whether the Pac-12 can compete against the rest of the nation, much like 2018 when Washington took on Auburn. Of course, now the Oregon Ducks get a date against Oregon in Dallas. Stanford faces the aforementioned Northwestern, UCF, and Notre Dame non-conference slate. Washington takes on BYU, so the Huskies should be safe there. And, of course, if USC can win other games and really be a factor in the Pac-12, then the game against Notre Dame becomes relevant on the national scene. The one wildcard team in this conference, I believe, is UCLA. I do have them still as a bottom dweller at 3-6 and 4-8 overall, but I think UCLA's got a potential to rise in the standings. Let's move it on to the Big 12, where I've got quite a race between Oklahoma and Texas, also TCU and Iowa State in the mix. The Sooners finish in first place at 7-2. Texas at 7-2 as well, although the Longhorns will lose 3 games overall in the regular season. TCU 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12, as will Iowa State finish at 8-4 and 6-3. Oklahoma State and Baylor at 7-5, 4-5 in the conference, as are the Mountaineers of West Virginia. You see Texas Tech there at 6-6, bowl eligible, and Matt Wells' first season, 3-6 in conference play, and the state of Kansas not faring too well in 2019 in the Big 12, with new head coaches both in Lawrence and in Manhattan. The Wildcats and the Jayhawks both finish at 2-7 in the Big 12. So, of course, first place second in the Big 12, and that once again will be Oklahoma taking on Texas, and this time the Longhorns emerge as the Big 12 champion for the first time since 2009. Texas 38, Oklahoma 35, and both teams finish at 10-3 following the championship game. We now look to the ACC, the most predictable of the 5 Power 5 conferences, especially, of course, in the Atlantic Division. Clemson is the class of the division, the conference, and possibly the nation once again. They will not lose a game. They're going undefeated at 12-0, and so that's a perfect 8-0 in the ACC. Then you've got a glut of teams after them, because if you look at the rest of the Atlantic Division, the better of the 2 divisions in the ACC, over the past 3 or 4 years, it's been filled with good programs, good teams, teams that make it to bowl play, but nothing that stellar, nothing close to elite. That will continue with the likes of Boston College and Florida State both going 5-3 in conference play with 4 losses overall. NC State and Syracuse just a game back at 4-4. Wake Forest also at 4-4, but they go 7-5 in conference play, as do NC State and Syracuse, you see right there. And Louisville is going to be slightly improved to 3-9 and finally winning a game in the ACC after an 0-8 finish in 2018. All right, here's the debate. It's in the Coastal Division, of course, because you've got a number of teams that could win the division. The stat that is cited when talking about projections for 2019 is, of course, that 6 different teams have won this division over the past 6 seasons. The team that has not would be the Virginia Cavaliers. Virginia was certainly the hot team at the end of 2018, winning the bowl game over South Carolina by 4 touchdowns. Miami is the most talented team. Bronco Mendenhall's doing a fine job at Virginia. He's got the best quarterback in the division with experience. Bronco Mendenhall's going to take Virginia to Miami. So as you notice here, both teams go 8-4 regular season, and more importantly, 5-3 in conference play. So who wins the head-to-head? Virginia goes to Miami, and they take out the Canes head-to-head to win the division championship. Virginia Tech and Duke at 4-4, Pitt at 3-5, misses bowl play. North Carolina gets a little bit better at 4-8. Georgia Tech slips in Jeff Collins' first season. Of course, he's righting the ship there at Georgia Tech and doing all sorts of renovations to the roster, and they're going to be hurting for a couple of years. Again, 4-8, 2-6 in the ACC. Really, the ACC is defined by Clemson, of course, and can anybody else step up and challenge them, like a Florida State possibly, or a Miami in the other division? The key non-conference games, other than Clemson taking on Texas A&M, which would be the one out-of-conference potential risk to Clemson's undefeated season, of course. In conference play, it would most likely be Syracuse or Florida State. Boston College goes to Notre Dame. Florida State has 2 out-of-conference games against Boise and Florida. It's very important that the ACC, for its reputation's sake, would win some of these games out of conference. Syracuse takes on Maryland. Virginia takes on Notre Dame. So the Irish, of course, have their 5 games against the ACC again this year. And, of course, the big opener on Saturday, Miami taking on Florida of the SEC. Let's move it on to the Big Ten. The Big Ten's champion has missed the playoffs 3 consecutive seasons. And, of course, the Big Ten has been shunned from the playoffs 2 consecutive years, with Ohio State winning the conference in 2017 and 18. In the Big Ten Western Division, we see a very competitive race as reflected right there. Nebraska, basically on the basis of having what I believe to be, along with Nathan Stanley, the best quarterback, certainly in the division, if not in the conference. Much improved playmakers on the outside, and at running back, a defense that's going to be better, not the best defense in the division, certainly. But Nebraska also only plays Ohio State out of the other division. Their other 2 games are against Maryland and Indiana. They get the easiest road out of the Eastern Division. They also face Wisconsin at home. Also face Iowa at home. So Nebraska, on the strength of a maturing quarterback, one of the best in college football, playmakers, and a better defense, and the schedule in its favor, squeaks out a division championship at 6-3. Then you've got a glut of teams. It's going to be quite a race. I love the Big Ten West. It's been upgraded with the likes of Nebraska now, Northwestern, Minnesota. All those teams that I just mentioned, along with Iowa and Wisconsin, finish at 5-4. Purdue's right in the mix at 4-5, and Illinois is still awful. Improved, but awful. They at least win their non-conference games and finish at 4-8. All right, in the Big Ten Eastern Division, you see that Ohio State and Michigan are both going to go 7-2 in conference play. So who's going to win the battle in the Big House? Ohio State, with Justin Fields in his 12th game at that point, and with a defense that is going to be maturing at that point, I believe is going to be playing its best football at that point. So give another win to the Buckeyes, winning at Michigan and claiming another Big Ten Eastern Division championship, but with 2 losses in conference play, 2 losses overall. So Ohio State at 7-2, Michigan at 7-2. Penn State, a game back, still looking to name a quarterback as of this taping. Michigan State at 5-4, sweep the out-of-conference games and finish 8-4. Maryland makes it into postseason play at 6-6. Indiana and Rutgers left out, and Rutgers, for a second consecutive season, failed to win a game in the Big Ten. There are less meaningful, impactful games out of conference for the Big Ten than any conference in America. Michigan does have the home game against Notre Dame, which, if Michigan has an undefeated record or one loss, could be enormous. Ohio State doesn't play a Power 5. Nebraska's big games against Colorado. Iowa plays Iowa State. Iowa State is actually, outside of Notre Dame, the most difficult opponent of any of these teams, along with Stanford by Northwestern. So a lot of mid-level Power 5 games for the Big Ten. No marquee matchups outside of, again, Notre Dame especially. And the Stanford game for Northwestern to a certain extent, although we don't expect Northwestern to be on the national scale. So it's basically Michigan, Notre Dame, or bust for the Big Ten, because otherwise, unless they slip up, it's a lot of mid-tier teams like BYU and Cincinnati and Arizona State, Colorado, Iowa State, those type of teams that the Big Ten will be facing non-conference, although Purdue does have a date against TCU, which is mighty interesting. All right, the Big Ten championship game comes down to the Huskers taking on the Buckeyes. This would be a rematch of what could be a Nebraska win at home against Ohio State early in the season. The Buckeyes in a shootout win at 42-31 over Nebraska to finish at 11-2. And finally, we go to the best conference in college football, the SEC. Alabama still rules the West. They go 11-1. They do trip up once. LSU, a game back at 6-2. Texas A&M as well at 6-2, with the loss to Clemson outside the conference. Auburn and Mississippi State sweep their non-conference games, finish 4-4 in the SEC. Ole Miss and Arkansas fail to make it to postseason play, even though the Hogs have one of the easiest non-conference schedules in college football. They sweep those four, but can only win once in conference play. In the SEC Eastern Division, you've got Georgia at 10-2, 7-2 out of conference. I believe that the Notre Dame game is going to be mighty scary for the Dogs. Consider that 2 years ago, Georgia en route to a national championship game appearance, and with Brandon Wimbush and his inability to throw the ball accurately and downfield, Notre Dame only lost by 1 against Georgia in South Bend. I know the game's in Athens, but I think this is scary territory for Georgia. They do get the win against Notre Dame and finish 10-2 overall. Florida at 8-4, 5-3. A step back overall from what they had last season. Missouri 8-4. Then you see a couple bowl-eligible teams, actually 3 in Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina, with the most brutal schedule in college football, having to face maybe the 3 best teams in the nation, Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson. Also Texas A&M and Florida, which could be top 10 teams, are according to the preseason poll. So South Carolina could be playing 5 of the top 8 to 10 teams in the country, but still make it to postseason play. Their opener against North Carolina is going to be crucial. Gamecocks finish at 6-6. Vandy just misses postseason play at 5-7. The LSU-Texas game is going to be phenomenal in Austin. If LSU can win that game, certainly that puts them in national championship type of talk, but of course it's going to come down there to their matchups, most notably against Alabama on the road and Texas A&M at home. A&M plays the game at Clemson. We mentioned, of course, the Aggies played the Tigers to the wire last year, but they've got to go on the road this time. We mentioned Georgia and Notre Dame, which will be mighty important. Auburn and Oregon, more important for the Pac-12 than the SEC, unless Auburn can miraculously fight through one of the most difficult schedules in college football. They've got to play the 2 toughest teams in the other division, Georgia and Florida. So Auburn with one of the toughest slates in college football. And, of course, you've got your glut of ACC rivalry matchups on the final weekend. Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, South Carolina, and Clemson, Kentucky, and Louisville. So it comes down to the SEC championship game for a 3rd consecutive year. I would love to be different, but this is what it's going to be. Bama versus Georgia. Alabama will enter the game with one loss, primed to get to the college football playoff. Georgia will be fighting for its life at 10-2. Georgia will beat Alabama to win the SEC championship, 31-27. Both teams finish at 11-2. So, how does this shake out for selection of the 4 teams to make the college football playoffs? Clemson's in. They're 13-0 as ACC champion. Now we've got 4 other conference champions with multiple losses. Georgia 11-2, Ohio State 11-2, Texas at 10-3, Oregon at 10-3. We also have 3 teams outside of the championship level that failed to win conference championships that are in the hunt, most notably Alabama with only 2 losses. So there you have it. For a second consecutive year, this is my prediction. And despite only getting 2 out of the 4 right last year, Georgia and Ohio State, I believed to be 2 of the 4 best teams in the country. So I am going with, again, the 4 best teams in the country. And they are Clemson, the 1 seed, Georgia, the 2, Ohio State, the 3. And as a loser in the SEC championship game, Alabama still makes the field as the 4 seed. Oh, yes, we've got a rematch. 2015, Bama wins by 5. 2016, Clemson comes back and wins the national championship in a nail-biter. 2017, Bama dominates Clemson in a national semifinal. 2018, they rematch, and of course, Trevor Lawrence and company way too much by 28 points. Clemson, Alabama, Part 5, goes to the Tigers in a great game, 34-31. That sets us up for a 2 versus 3 game, Georgia and Ohio State. Excellent game. Bulldogs, too much in the fourth quarter, win it 37-27. That brings us to a national championship game of Georgia and Clemson. And I really had to think this one through. Clemson is the best odds-on pick to make for anybody out there predicting the 2019 season for a number of reasons. Right now, they are the best. They have the best quarterback, at least one of the 2 best. They have the easiest run. They have the easiest path of any of the contenders. By far, it's not even close. They would almost have to lose 2 games, which is unforeseeable. So Clemson almost already has a spot in the playoff to begin with. Georgia's going to have to fight through a brutal schedule. Alabama, a decent schedule. Ohio State, a very difficult Big Ten schedule. And, of course, Michigan and other teams that should be in contention. Oklahoma and Texas, and a glut of teams that could possibly survive the Pac-12. So this is not an odds-on favorite type pick. The safe pick is Clemson because they are almost assuredly going to be in the playoff. Georgia has a lot of landmines to navigate to get to the national championship semifinals. They've got Notre Dame, they've got Florida, they got Texas A&M. They've got the rest of the SEC Eastern Division, which on any given night with decent teams like Missouri and Kentucky could jump up and play well. That said, I'm still going to take the path of most resistance and take Georgia with a missed field goal, winning the national championship in overtime over Clemson. Dogs 37, Tigers 34. Please give me your predictions, your comments, your questions, your criticisms. I'm expecting many right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We will all talk soon.